Last week, I made a video about Phillip Schofield, the tarnished TV presenter, and it was specifically a video that aimed to take an extensive look inside the psychology of Schofield to try and determine where his mind sat a whole year after his controversy originally came to light. A quick recap: Phillip Schofield, a married man with grown-up children, came out as gay in 2020 on the TV programme This Morning, of which he co-presented. It was alleged that the reason for this sexuality revelation wasn't merely a man celebrating his truest identity, but rather that they were dark, shrouded secrets concerning Schofield's private life that were on the verge of being publicised by a third-party news source. Allegations that substantiated more weight in 2023 when Schofield revealed that he was indeed having an affair with a much younger colleague. A colleague who Phillip first met when the colleague was a child. Phillip subsequently went on to help the colleague secure a position on his TV show, sparking accusations of grooming. I was able to gain what I felt was a comprehensive understanding of what appeared to be a very delusional man by examining proclamations that Phillip made about his own behaviour. The problem, however, is that although I came to a reasonably firm conclusion on Schofield and deduced that he is a man with numerously poor character traits, that very conclusion was based upon an overly dramatised three-part documentary series, if you call it that, from Channel 5 titled Castaway, of which Phillip himself was credited as being a presenter, on top of being the topic of the series. Needless to say, Phillip was given an incredibly advantageous opportunity to spin his own narrative into whatever fairy tale he saw fit, and he certainly attempted to do just that. Remarkably, my overall verdict, even with Phillip's control over his own portrayal, was still largely negative. Yet, I was left feeling as if I was forming a very serious judgment based upon a weak foundation of information. For that reason, I have made the decision to look into Phillip's BBC interview, something that he did 2 years ago now, and practically immediately after the crumbling of his reputation. For all of the BBC's many flaws, unlike in Castaway, Schofield wouldn't have creative control, and therefore we can expect a much more balanced and mostly non-partisan insight into the realities of Phillip's misdemeanours, something that the presenter made sure to stay far away from during his desert island TV drivel. We'll continue talking about Phillip momentarily, but for now I just want to tell you about today's video sponsor, and that is Holy. Like a lot of ex-chavs, I enjoy waking up in the dead of night in preparation to do an early morning mountain climb, and that is where Holy comes in with their range of better for you energy drinks. Holy have kindly sent me some of their unreleased tubs, or at least they were unreleased, but they are now available. The Dragon Fruit Energy and Honey Darjeeling Iced Tea. Additionally, Holy has brought out some new milkshake flavours. We're going to taste test these unreleased tubs today and see how they compare to my current favourite, which is Raspberry Raptor. Right, let's do the taste test. I'll just superimpose some clips showing you how easy it is to put together. A bottle of Holy, it is super simple. It's just ice, water, and then a scoop of your chosen flavour. So we'll start with Darjeeling and Honey. This is the new iced tea flavour. I'm not usually a fan of iced tea. Do you know what it tastes like, though? It tastes like health. That's the sort of thing my mum would flock to. Now we're going to try the Raspberry Raptor. So I already know what this tastes like. This is my favourite of Holy's energy line. It is genuinely beautiful, though. It's going to be hard to beat. Very, very, very hard to beat. The contender, Dragon Fruit. Will it rival my favourite? That is the question. Cheers. You're about to find out if Dragon Fruit was really better than Raspberry Raptor whilst I'm up a mountain. It turns out Dragon Fruit was the best flavour and it enabled me to climb this mountain. Film the mountain. There's a deal going on right now for new customers. You can get a starter set deluxe, which comes with this glass bottle with a few stickers. Within the starter set deluxe is an assortment of Holy's best-selling flavours from their energy, hydration and iced tea ranges. If you use my code BANTER5, you get £5 off on top of the starter set deluxe deal. Remember, that's code BANTER5 for £5 off your first order, and code BANTER for 10% off any subsequent orders. This is from my dead homies. God bless. I appreciate your time watching that ad, because you're supporting what I'm trying to do here, so thank you very much. Back to Schofield. So the BBC interview begins with the journalist asking Philip how he feels. What precedes is Philip giving a masterclass in performative emotional manipulation.
Philip, thank you for speaking to me and to the BBC. You've had quite the week. How are you?
It's like a weird numbness.
It should be noted, the level of scrutiny that I'm about to give to this piece of media directly correlates with the time it's been since the interview was first posted. If I was making this video during Philip's exposure in 2023, then I would, of course, exercise more due diligence in my analysis and perhaps make fewer assumptions about Schofield. As, although he generally appears to be calculated in nature, it would be unjustifiable, in my opinion, to lambast a man who is possibly on the edge. In the spirit of humility, I appreciate that however much I value my own ability to read people, I'm not always going to be correct, and I accept that wholeheartedly. Thankfully, we have since been treated to the mess that was Castaway, where Philip awarded us a glimpse into his true character. And what I found was a man who uses feigned self-vulnerability as a vice to transition into attacking people who he believes have wronged him, all the while refusing to take any genuine responsibility. For that reason, I feel empowered to look at this interview from a completely unbiased and raw perspective, putting my own honest judgment above the need to safeguard a potentially unstable man, given that Philip has levelled the playing fields with his own malicious, toxic attacks.
But you come to a point where you just think, how much are you supposed to take? If all of those people that write all of that stuff, do they ever think that there's actually a person at the other end?
The person at the other end has acted in a way that has prompted an ensuing reaction. The argument that the reaction from the public was excessive could be legitimate, but any stance that sees the negative reception to Philip's behaviour in of itself as unfounded would be based upon delusion, a quality that Schofield himself has proven to be very familiar with. It's easy to exist in a realm of self-pity when you feel that the world around you is crumbling. And I wouldn't begin to suggest that the woe is me demeanour from Philip in the beginning of this interview is all part of one big act, necessarily. What I would like to point out, however, is that Philip travelled to the studio, checked in, had his mic attached, positioned himself properly in front of the cameras, was told when filming was about to start, and then still proceeded to perform with these long sighs and this orchestrated, gentle voice.
Are you feeling okay to do this? Are you feeling strong enough to do this interview?
Yeah, I have to.
Why? Why do you want to do this interview?
Because there is an innocent person here who didn't do anything wrong, who is vulnerable and probably feels like I do.
Castaway will prove to act as a source of invaluable insight when attempting to analyse Philip from this BBC interview, as we now know that Philip's care for Matthew McGreevy, the young man who he had his affair with, did not extend past the performative activism that we see here. During Castaway, a series that took place once the dust had settled, permitting Philip to demonstrate his most authentic self, Matthew is barely directly mentioned, and when he is referred to, he's merely labelled as a mistake. And all of this sought-after sympathy is instead redirected by Philip back towards Philip.
Will be forever sorry. You know, I screwed up. I made a mistake.
No longer under the critical eye of the public, and we see that McGreevy is reduced to an afterthought. With that hindsight in mind, I feel that I can state confidently that Philip is lying when he tries to suggest that the well-being of Matthew is the main motivation for the BBC interview. It isn't. I believe that the real reason for the interview was a last-ditch effort at damage control, with self-preservation being at the forefront of Schofield's mind, as it always appears to be.
When did you first meet this young man in question? What were the circumstances?
I was invited by a friend of mine to go to a school, something I've done thousands of times. Whether it was immediately or sometime after, he said, will you follow him on Twitter because he's a fan? So I said, yeah, sure, no problem, which I did. And he probably came back saying thanks for the follow.
And he was, what, 15 at the time?
Yeah. I follow 11,300 people, and in all the time I've been on Twitter, there has never been any whiff of impropriety.
And while that might be a fact, it immediately becomes irrelevant once impropriety has taken place. I have never hit anyone with my car, but I imagine if I ever do, my prior lack of hitting pedestrians won't hold up in court as a suitable defence. You had an affair with a young man who, by your own account, you had personally known since he was a child. That fact alone warrants investigation, regardless of any past transgressions or the apparent lack thereof.
So he followed you on Twitter, you followed him back. Did you start having a sort of email exchange or direct message exchange of any kind?
Hardly at all. It was just all the way through, just on and off.
Hardly at all is an interesting way of wording your admission to conversing with a teenager over private Twitter messages. A teenager who, a few years down the line, you went on to have sex with. The amount of messages holds less importance when coupled with the question that's actually being asked, which is, did you have a message exchange of any kind? And when you look past Philip's deliberate sugarcoating, his answer to that question was yes.
When you look back now, if you were to look back at those messages now, is there any sense in which you were flirting with him?
No. I've been 41 years in television. You know, nothing like this before. You know, no accusations. I mean, this is all, you know, accusations.
There are accusations at play, yes, but you have admitted that you had a sexual relationship with Matthew. So the brandishing that these are all accusations is simply false. Again, for the sake of theoretics, someone could be rightfully accused of wrongdoing, yet in this hypothetical scenario, there could be an element of an accusation that isn't true. That one mistruth wouldn't in turn invalidate the reality that wrongdoing as a whole has been committed. Philip seems to possess this affinity for bringing up redundant points, all while drip-feeding half-truths. I assume for the sake of painting a more favourable image for himself, while still being able to sort of uphold the idea that he has been honest throughout the interview. Schofield is purposely operating in a buffer zone of more or less telling the truth, all the while presenting it in a misleading manner. So while you'd perhaps struggle to directly criticise him for lying, he remains able to present a more convenient and distorted version of events and be unchallenged in the process.
And then the rumour started, and then you lie. You know, you've had a workplace fling, and you lie about it. And a great many people would have had a workplace fling and lied about it. And I fully appreciate there is a massive age gap, but that happens in life as well.
A great many people would have had a workplace fling and lied about it, Philip. You're correct. But I doubt that most of those people would have first met their workplace fling when the fling was a child. And with that, this relatability angle that you're trying to push onto the audience, it deteriorates once the viewers remember that they do not groom teenagers. You fully appreciate that there is a massive age gap because it is a relatively acceptable detail of your situation. As the few people who have defended you in my comment section have pointed out, an age gap, even a large one, between two adults is mostly seen as conventional. Yet what those same Schofield defenders, along with yourself, always seem to neglect is the one crucial ingredient that changes the entire recipe. The ingredient in this case is that you had communication with a child up until the point he was an adult, and then accelerated into a sexual relationship. That is the damning detail that you constantly fail to appreciate, because to recognise that aspect of your reality would be to admit that your entire case is indefensible. An approach that wouldn't align well with your egocentric need to be seen by an audience.
And people would say the circumstances are as follows here. You met someone who was a child, you were in a position of power over them, you used your power eventually to give them something they craved, which was a shot at a job in the media, you nurtured a relationship, and then that relationship became sexual. And they might ask, what's the difference between that and grooming?
Well, I would say that the initial list of things was not right anyway.
Philip, that list correlates with your own account. The difference is that while you will dance around the more precarious areas of conversation, sprinkling a delicate coat of sugar around your misdemeanours as you scheme to lessen the blow, the interviewer has instead stripped all of that away and presented the timeline in an objective, neutral manner, in turn exposing your transgressions for what they are.
Well, I would say that the initial list of things was not right anyway.
Tell me, why?
Because it was a totally innocent picture, a totally innocent Twitter follow, of which I follow 11,400 people, and then it was a completely innocent backwards and forwards over a period of time about a job, about careers.
Dogmatism. I'd argue that the pretext of innocence that Philip describes is subjective. Innocent according to who? According to the word of a man who was allegedly fired for misleading both his employer and colleagues. Phillip Schofield has demonstrated a consistent and significant lack of the ability to recognise personal flaws, paired with a provable affinity for lying. So his proclamations, especially in regards to himself, are planted upon fragile foundation at best.
What specifically do you feel that you did that was wrong?
I kissed someone in the workplace, which led on to a little bit more.
This pathetic confession that yet again adheres to Philip's trend of partial acknowledgement of his misdemeanours exhibits a glaringly obvious need for this man to be shunned from all future television roles and positions of power in general. In one small segment of an otherwise 45-minute interview, a segment that could have easily been missed by a non-scrutinous eye, Schofield literally displays his inability to see what the rest of us see. Up until now, my speculation of Philip's delusion towards his own situation was merely an educated assumption, based off of what I was observing. Now, however, Philip has admitted, in his own words, that he is incapable of seeing fault past the point of infidelity, a level of such extreme self-deception that, in my eyes, makes him dangerous.
Do you feel that what was morally wrong about it was that it involved an abuse of power because you were an older guy who had more power than him?
Obviously, that criticism has been levelled at me, but well, I've never done that in my whole life. I've never abused my power anywhere. I'm not a bully. God, you read the things that you're supposed to be.
The weak defence that Schofield has now repeatedly relied on of, well, I haven't done this before, provides further proof that even in the face of valid criticism, of which he possesses no suitable rebuttal to, he will still, by way of sheer narcissistic willpower, seek out vindication for himself, even if the vindication makes absolutely zero sense. You not having a power imbalance before, Matthew, was made irrelevant the second you engaged in a power imbalance with Matthew. In my opinion, Philip is being purposely extraneous. With that, he's showcasing his predisposition for manipulation and thus gives merit to the title of this video.
How would you characterise your relationship with her now? Is it broken?
I adore Holly. I mean, I've always adored Holly. She's my TV sister. And I from my point of view, no. I don't have a problem with Holly at all.
My previous video was on the Phillip Schofield Castaway series, a series that succeeded this interview by a year. If you did watch that video, you'll know that Schofield had a lot of tone changes by the time it came to filming his Channel 5 series, and his demeanour during this BBC interview is in stark contrast. One such example is his attitude towards his once co-star Holly Willoughby, who he both directly and indirectly berates throughout his 3-part Channel 5 programme. With that crucial bit of insight in mind, we can now determine that 2 possibilities exist. Either Schofield is incredibly quick to completely alter his beliefs and has no problem with broadcasting these ever-rotating beliefs onto national television. Alternatively, he was lying about his view on Holly in this interview. Both possibilities render his words, and therefore anything he's previously said during this interview, as unreliable. Phillip goes on to talk about when he first knew that he was gay.
It grew bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until I was really mentally struggling and like deeply mentally struggling, and my relationship with my colleague coincided with that moment. That is not an excuse. I make no excuses.
Do you mind me asking if that was your first gay relationship, or had you had gay flings or sexual experiences before then?
I think this interview is not about other experiences.
The second the interview changes course from this sanctimonious man's premeditated narrative, he shuts down the conversation. It comes as no surprise that Schofield refuses to speak on prior gay experiences, as he uses a feigned mental struggle as an excuse for his behaviour with Matthew. If it was found that Phillip had been exploring his sexuality before McGreevy, this self-pitying justification that Phillip clings to would suddenly break down, as a longer history with gay experiences would suggest that he has had more time to adjust, and therefore this angle of mental struggle that he's been relying on will prove to be a lie as well, something that the conniving TV presenter is all too aware of.
And one very prominent public figure phoned me the other day and said, I wanted to check that you were okay. I have never seen such homophobia in my life.
Why do you think this coverage has been homophobic?
So if it was a heterosexual relationship, then, it would have been a bit of nudge, nudge, wink, wink. If it's a gay relationship, then suddenly it raises eyebrows. It's wrong.
I can't decide whether this is an exhibition of cowardice, a masterclass in elite-level mass-scale gaslighting, or a mixture of the two, but what I am confident of is that Phillip's motive here is a deliberate one. I am personally convinced that Schofield is far smarter than I originally gave him credit for. And while I previously deduced that Phillip is perhaps suffering from the truth of his transgressions and therefore manufacturing an alternate sequence of events as a coping mechanism, I am instead swayed to believe that a lot of what Schofield says is prearranged. Phillip Schofield strikes me as a man who will stop at nothing to repair his image, even if that means delivering a consciously deceitful portrayal of events. The consistent allusion to homophobia being the root cause of his backlash is a deeply concerning example of the lengths that Schofield is prepared to go in order to simulate innocence.
It's the mere fact that this is so gigantic, and I appreciate the workplace and and the history. I get that, but it's the fact that it's so massive is predominantly homophobia.
And that, Phillip, is predominantly a load of bollocks. It's worth keeping in mind that this video acts as an opinion piece. This is my individual conviction, and it should be treated as such. I say this because while my own investigation into Schofield comes to an end with this video, and I put the topic to bed, I do so with an altered and harsher view of Phillip. Throughout my Castaway video, in the midst of condemnation by myself, I still made several attempts to see the human side of Schofield. I even theorised that his behaviour may be rooted in avoidance, that perhaps his alteration of the facts is Phillip's way of dealing with himself, suggesting that Phillip recognises his wrongdoings and reshapes reality as a coping mechanism. A synopsis that would paint Phillip Schofield as a much more redeemable character. Now that I've watched both Castaway and the BBC interview, and have noted the regular inconsistencies with truth, and yet consistencies in victimisation, I now feel that it's only logical to change my original verdict. I believe that Phillip Schofield is much smarter, much more aware, and significantly more manipulative than I originally thought. I believe that all of his media appearances had been planned, his words rehearsed, and his motive cemented. In my opinion, Phillip Schofield had planned a scheme to repair his image and was prepared to use malicious tactics to do so, such as blame shifting, deliberately making events indiscernible where he saw fit, and emotionally manipulating the audience, all with the hope of achieving his goal. Plan A for Phillip Schofield was to repair and reinvent his image. If that didn't work, Plan B was to fade out of the limelight with the insinuation that it was on his own terms. It was his own decision not to continue TV work, as to not appear disgraced. I expect that we're about to see Plan B in action. Phillip's intention of fixing his heavily punctured reputation has evidently fallen flat, and with that, we'll see a once beloved personality dissolve into irrelevance, with his last wish being that he appears to be the orchestrator of said irrelevance in order to keep hold of that final crumb of control. I feel that I have finally said all that needs to be said on Schofield. A special thanks to everyone who is watching this video early on Patreon. I also post exclusive content on Patreon and have all of my old YouTube videos if you didn't already know. I used to be a little bit edgy, a lot different to what this is. If you're a new viewer and you're up for a shock, get in my Patreon, linked in the description, and go and have a look. If you're not already subscribed, maybe consider it. I don't want to be too pushy or anything, but click it. Click it. Alright, sound. Thank you for watching. I'll see you soon.